Welcome back to the Wrong Advice Podcast. I'm your host, John Pachuto, and I'm very, very excited to have my good buddy, Mr. Matt Lombardo, on with us today. Matt, how you doing, my friend?
John, I'm great. Thanks for having me. We've been talking about doing this for quite some time. I think a year ago we started these conversations. So I'm glad we finally got the
Yeah.
timing right. I've been looking forward to doing the pod for a while and really glad to be here.
Super excited to have you, Matt. Can you give a quick introduction to the listeners on who you are?
Yeah, I'm the senior NFL insider over at Heavy.com. It's a role that I've been in since about last July. I've covered the Giants for a couple of years before that. Long before that, covered the Philadelphia Eagles for various outlets, full time at NJ.com for a year before moving over to the Giants beat. And I've done a little bit of everything in the industry. I've done sports talk radio in Philadelphia as a nights and weekends host, obviously covering the NFL and just really carving out a niche in terms of in that national reporter insider role, and it's been a lot of fun and a fun climb up the career ladder to this point.
That's awesome. How did you get your start? Like, was this something that you had a passion for in college? Were you, a broadcasting major? How did this kind of all come to
Yeah,
fruition?
it's funny. I tell this story all the time. I've told it in job interviews that dating back to when I was 4, 5, 6 years old. My dad always listened to sports talk radio in the car. And I remember getting in the car to run errands with him, or I'd spend Saturday mornings in his office watching college football while he did work. And every time I got in the car, I'd be like, hey, Dad, can we listen to Eagles talk? Can we listen to sports talk? And from that point on, I knew I wanted to get into sports talk radio, going down the shore every summer growing up. One of the first things I do on the walk to the beach is grab a Philadelphia Daily News. And I remember it being like 60 cents back in the day and thinking, I want to be the guy that people turn to read his opinion on the big trade or the big, breaking sports story. And off we went. I was a graduate of Westchester University back in 2009, and my first job out of school after being the sports editor of the paper and play-by-play announcer for the football and basketball team was I hosted the morning and the afternoon drive sports talk shows at a small little radio station that had to power down at sunset. They'd play the national anthem. True story. They'd play the national anthem at whatever time sunset was. If it was 5:17, your show ended at 5:17 and they powered off for the night. They had to do it legally. And then from there, did a little bit of everything. Sports updates on the ESPN radio affiliate in Atlantic City, writing for some blogs here and there. And along the winding path we go, I wind up at 97.5 The Fanatic in Philadelphia as a producer, ultimately wind up on air there, hosted post game for Flyers and Sixers games, post Eagles games, and the writing track kind of was where it wound up leading me to the full time opportunities, and that's where we are today.
Yeah. When you sort of, check off the career bucket list, right? Like you're doing the thing that you wanted to do since you were a little kid. How do you, as a fan, separate like fan affinity for work? Because I imagine those two things butt heads quite a bit. And, I'm a diehard sports fan. I would find it very difficult to be biased at all
Yeah.
in reporting. But how do you like sort of like separate the, Matt the fan and Matt the writer, Matt the content creator, who's the person who's in charge of like doing this for a living?
John, let me just dispel this right here because there's this huge notion across Twitter that I'm some sort of like diehard Eagles fan. Let me just put this to bed, right? As soon as I walked into that Eagles locker room for the first time as a beat writer, and this had to be back, 2010, 2011, right then I knew that my days being an NFL fan were over. So I've really
Oh,
taken the NFL fandom and put that up on a shelf. And I've really channeled all of those fan emotions into Penn State football, where we have season tickets. I make it up to 4 or 5 home games a year whenever my schedule allows me based around the NFL calendar. The Philadelphia Phillies, I'm a big Phillies fan, especially now with the run they just went on to the World Series this year. But people they can't seem to wrap their head around it. But I'm just not an NFL fan. I love the sport. I live for the storylines. I have relationships in
yeah.
buildings all around the league with agents who represent players who are on teams all around the league. And yeah, growing up, I was an Eagles fan. But if you sat down and watched the Super Bowl with me, you would have seen my father in his Eagles shirt, my wife wearing an Eagles jersey, and I was sitting there just kind of as an observer, tweeting as the game went along and lining up content for the next day. I really don't have that fan bone in my body when it comes to the NFL. And I know that some people do it differently, right? Like there are NFL reporters who still have their favorite team or whatever. I can't get juiced up for those moments and those opportunities in the same way that fans do, just by the way that I do my job from a relationship building and source building standpoint.
Yeah. I mean, it's like the separation of church and state, right?
Right,
You got to like put the fandom to the
right.
side, and like until your career is done, you retire that Eagles hat and jersey, and maybe 67, 8 year old Matt gets to bring that stuff
Yeah, we'll see.
out of retirement.
We'll
Hopefully,
see. And then,
yeah, hopefully it still
maybe
fits.
my dad takes my kids to a couple of games or whatever. But if they just grow up being big
Yeah,
college sports fans, hey, that's fine. If they enjoy watching the NFL and they have favorite players around the league or on their fantasy team, more power to you. But it's not a role and not an emotion that I have.
that's cool. I appreciate that. I'm kind of with you too. As much as I am a diehard Giants fan and I love the NFL, to me, college football is, well, it used to be football at its purest form. Obviously, there's a lot more money involved with the nil stuff now. But I'm with you. As a Penn State fan, my brother graduated from Penn
Nice.
State. I have a very interesting theory that I think listen, I think Penn State's a great school. I think they've got tons of resources. I personally, and this might be a bit critical, don't think that James Franklin is the guy who can take that program to the next level. I don't know if that's a rational thought or if it's just sort of the college football world that we live in, and the landscape doesn't allow for perhaps a Big Ten team to compete like that anymore. What are your thoughts on the Penn State football program and like the future that it holds
Yeah,
for them?
I actually think the future's never been brighter for them. And, full disclosure, James is a friend. But, looking
Yeah.
at their situation, I think it's been a tug of war between James Franklin and the administration to get the resources necessary to compete with the Michigans, the Ohio States, the Georgias, the Alabamas. And, Kraft,
Mhm.
the new athletic director who was brought in this year, seems completely aligned in vision. They have multi-million dollar facility upgrades in place that are underway. They just upgraded the weight room. They're upgrading the facilities coming up here. And it seems like they've really, after being way behind on NIL, I think they're emerging as one of the leading programs developing those NIL relationships and opportunities for the players. I just don't think they ever had the quarterback in place up there. Now you have Drew Allard, who was the number one ranked quarterback nationally in 2022. They have the top two
Mhm.
running backs in Nick Singleton and Katron Allen, a defense that's on the rise. I actually think that this 2 year window, 2023 and 2024 with Drew Allard, you're going to see some big things from Penn State. And I think that this is the window for them, not only to make the college football playoff, but I wouldn't be surprised if in 2024 we're talking about them in a national championship situation. I just think that James Franklin is recruiting at a higher level now. Manny Diaz is an
Mhm.
elite defensive coordinator with head coaching experience. Mike Yurkich, this is going to be his third year as the offensive coordinator, something they haven't had at Penn State for the last 4 or 5 years. There's been a lot of turnover there. So the talent, the coaching, and the money, most importantly, the money and the resources, John, coming from the rest of the university, I think has set the stage for them to kind of crack through into that elite tier.
Well, I'm sure my brother is going to be very happy to hear that. I do agree. The kid at quarterback they have is an outstanding talent. They're building a lot of solid pieces around him that can make them a big time threat in the Big Ten. And you look at some programs in the SEC that are coming up and coming down, and it's really hard to maintain that level. And there's always these ebbs and flows in college football. Programs peak and rise, on a 2 to 4 year basis. I went to West Virginia from '04 to '08, saw probably the best run in Mountaineer football history, save for like the early '80s. It's the best sport in my opinion on earth. I love it dearly, and it's just the pageantry, the camaraderie, just everything about it is just gets my juices flowing. Like as a high school football player, is the
Yeah, there's
best.
nothing like the
Um,
atmosphere. You look at going to a Penn State whiteout and there's 110,000 people, and it's not just people dressed in white. I mean, it's uh, when you walk into that building for the whiteout game, like you're a legitimate part of that experience and you're a part of the outcome in that game. I think it was 5 false start penalties on Minnesota's first 2 possessions. I mean, the noise is real, the passion is real, and that happens in a lot of places. Tuscaloosa, you look at the swamp when the Gators are relevant. Like the atmosphere in college football is so antithetical to what you see in the NFL on Sundays. Don't get me wrong, NFL Sunday crowds are great, but the crowds at college football games are part of the game, and there's nothing that can really
Yeah.
replicate that in sports, in my opinion.
Oh, I completely agree. I'm curious, how do you think James Franklin was able to turn Penn State from like linebacker U to running back U? Because like the string of running backs that they've had through that program, dating back probably to just maybe even before Saquon, but the run of RBs that they've been able to get through that program has been astonishing, and that's not even to any detriment to their linebacking core either. But how do you think he's been able to attract such high level running back talent to that
Yeah,
program?
I think you hit the nail on the head. He flipped Saquon Barkley, who was originally committed to Rutgers. When you get a Saquon Barkley into that program, and then you can walk into Miles Sanders' living room, who was the number one prospect in the state of Pennsylvania in that recruiting cycle, and say, hey, look at Saquon, what he's doing. You're going to be better than him. You bring in Miles Sanders, and all of a sudden you have Nick Singleton fall into your lap, who was the number one running back in the country last year in that recruiting cycle, and you bring in Katron Allen, and you had Noah Kane before that. I mean, you're right. It's become a bit of a running back pipeline. I don't know that they've had the same success that, say, the University of Georgia has, but man, Miles Sanders just played in a Super Bowl. If Nick Singleton is a top five draft pick in 2 years, and Katron Allen is a top 10 draft pick in 2 years, I kind of put Georgia and Penn State in that running back U conversation kind of neck and neck. So I think that it's when you start to have those household names that get drafted early, that helps you walk into those top tier prospects of that position in the coming years and build on that pipeline. You mentioned linebacker. Micah Parsons, Abdul Carter is there now as a 5-star top 10 linebacker in the country walking in as a sophomore. So they have a lot of talent at some key positions. I think it's just a matter of developing it and getting these guys drafted year after year that allows you to go and target the top prospects at the position for years and years and years.
Oh yeah, absolutely. You have a clear and undeniable passion for the sport. I'm curious, did you play growing up? Was football a big part of your
Yeah,
youth?
I played for 2 years, and I was a blocking tight end who couldn't block at the 80-pound and under league, or, weighing at a soaking wet 58 pounds. Like I was the scrawny kid growing up. Like that was me, and so I didn't really play football growing up. But football's always just been such a big part of my upbringing and my family. My dad and I watching Penn State on Saturday and the Eagles on Sunday with family. I mean, that was kind of how it always was. And growing up in the Philadelphia area, very similar to the North Jersey and New York area. Up there, I'm sure it's a lot of Yankees, but the Giants as well. But the football kind of is in your blood growing up, and I think that that's kind of what fueled it for me. And also on the journalism side of things, like I realized pretty quickly I was not going to be an elite athlete. It just wasn't going to happen for me to make the pros, but I wanted to be around sports. I had a passion for sports journalism, and I followed that, and I've been fortunate enough in my career to carve out a path where, especially at the juncture I am now, covering Super Bowls and at a place like Heavy, where they've really built a department around me. It's a very rewarding and valuable path to be on.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. I mean, a big part of my life now is storytelling, whether it's through photography, whether it's through this podcast. I relate to that tremendously. Just being able to dive into a subject matter, person, place, thing, whatever it might be, and being able to elicit any sort of emotion from a person who interacts with that story is important to me. I do it with my pictures, and I do it with this podcast. When you're pitching ideas, when you're creating something that you want to tell a story about, what is things, people in themes that jump out at you that you look at and say this will make something for a compelling story that I would like to tell, and I would see other people like to read
Yeah,
about?
you know what? If I have a weakness in my career, John, I think that that might be it, because I think that I'm one of those type of bulldog reporters where if you pitch me an idea, I'm going to go get it. You know what I'm saying? Like, I'm going to chase it
Oh,
down and I'm going to get the best angle that you can. Admittedly, those ideas don't always come quickly to me. Maybe it's because you're looking at it from that 30,000 foot, all 32 teams in the NFL perspective. But I like kind of, when I do have the opportunity to chase those stories, I like looking for the guy who has emerged as the leader, the guy who stepped up. Like, what made him tick? What makes him have the ability to get guys to follow him on that locker room in big moments in games? Those are the sort of things that I go after. and love to tell those stories. But admittedly, I think I'm good at a lot of things. I think that I've been able to get to a point in my career from a relationship building standpoint and just working hard. But admittedly, those storylines, they don't always come easy to me. That's not always a strength of mine in my career.
Yeah, there are, in my opinion, there's like two different kind of sports reporters. There are the newsbreakers, like the Schefters and the Rappaports of the world, who are breaking immediate stories as they happen, and then there are like long form creators who are diving into the nitty gritty, like you mentioned, like finding compelling figures telling their stories. I've always sort of been drawn to people who are telling stories. I mean, obviously, a great Twitter follow is Rappaport or Schefter to know what's going on in
Right.
the league as a whole. But
Right.
to me, I was drawn to your work very early on, back when you were writing for NJ.com, I think it was, with the Giants, obviously, because you were beat writing for them. It was an easy follow for me because
Checked a lot of
the
boxes.
way in which you yeah, well, it's a short list, man. It's the local paper and it's my team, so you're
I
two
love
for
it.
two in that regard. But yeah, so like I was drawn to your work, and then obviously it was a logical Twitter follow, and it just became like a nice internet friendship that we developed. But to me, like I said, I've always found myself sort of gravitating towards storytellers, people who are going to go beyond the surface area of what a story may be. And that's something that I like quite a bit about your job. As the landscape of sports media changes tremendously into more video, more podcasting, how do you find the avenues that you think make best for what you do as a reporter? Like it just to me can be immensely overwhelming. I mean, here we are doing a video podcast, and I started a podcast because it was audio, but there being that the landscape of the NFL is changing significantly in the media world, how do you sort of, define your path for what you
Yeah, I don't think
create?
we could have timed this interview any better, John, this conversation any better, because in my new role, in my new deal with Heavy that we signed at the beginning of the month, we're transitioning into almost exclusively podcast and video with a little bit of writing on the side and maybe a big column or two every week. And of course, some reporting. That's going to be the bedrock of all of it. But I think that, in my medium, in this role that I'm currently in, it's about finding, okay, here's the story that just broke. How do we advance it further? How do we put our spin on that story? So I'll just give you an example. Adam Schefter reports today that the Cowboys and Ezekiel Elliott's agents are going to figure out their future during the NFL Combine and get a sense of their value while they're in Indianapolis. Well, I start asking around and talk to some agents who represent running backs, talk to some people from teams around the league to get a sense for what are they hearing on Ezekiel Elliott's situation. What's next for Zeke? What is his value? Is he going to go back to the Cowboys? We heard these whispers about a potential pay cut or a restructure. What does that look like? See, I think that where I really thrive and where I provide a lot of value is that I'm connected enough on multiple fronts, sources, in buildings, former players, that when a story happens, I think one of my biggest strengths is being able to advance it and being able to advance it in video form, spending a segment talking about it on the podcast. And where I think Heavy is now doing a really nice job is they've found a way to take videos, 90-second, 2 minute, 3 minute video clips of me or whoever providing their analysis on a story and embedding them into article posts. And you're kind of down a dual revenue path at that point. So that's what I'm really excited about doing moving forward from here. And I think it presents a real opportunity for content creators in the space to kind of replicate and do it that way if you have the ability to.
That's cool. I like that. Obviously, you've had a lot of different experience in a 10 plus year career in sports media, from traditional media outlets like the NJ.coms of the world and papers and such. How you just signed a new deal with Heavy Sports. How do you figure out who's the right partner for Matt Lombardo? How do you figure out who that strategic partner is going to be from a job perspective? Because in a world where someone with a large Twitter following, someone with a significant social media following can sort of develop their own platform. How do you know who to partner with for yourself?
Yeah, John, I'll say this, coming into Heavy and signing with them initially last July, I've never felt more valued in my career because, from the first conversations that I had with the sports editor, the NFL director, the CEO of the company, there was a clear vision there. And I think that our goals really aligned in terms of not only putting talent in the best position to succeed because they're going to ultimately find success. But they do a really great job of leveraging social media and digital media into profits in a landscape where you look at what's happening all across the sports media landscape with companies laying off people and jobs getting slashed and roles getting eliminated. They really are investing in talent, and that excites me because they have a vision on how to maximize that talent. And they went from being an aggregation house, and they still do some aggregation, to wanting to take that next step into original reporting and build their NFL operation around me and my reporting. And when you have an outlet who's willing to throw that kind of commitment behind you, financially and otherwise, John, I'm telling you, I have never felt more valued. I've worked at some mainstream outlets, like you said, at NJ.com, 97.5 in Philly, Sports Talk Radio. I've never found a place to be more innovative or invested in their people and their talent than Heavy. And I couldn't be happier to be here.
That's pretty fucking cool. I
Yeah.
like that a lot. I'm genuinely curious with, that sort of great amount of responsibility. Do you ever struggle with things like imposter syndrome?
All the time.
Things like maybe, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
I mean, I'll tell you a story. A year and a half ago, I was interviewing for a couple of major roles at significant outlets, legacy outlets. And there were thoughts in my head all the time. Is this above my head? Is this above my pay grade? Is that something that I'd be able to even handle? And yeah, like it's a real thing. Because you don't want to be into a trap, you don't want to fall into a trap where you feel like you're overexposing yourself or that somebody's making a commitment to you that you can't live up to. And I've just gotten to the point now where I'm pretty good at this. I'm pretty well connected. I know my limits. I tell sources all the time, listen, I know the scoop is probably going to go to Adam Schefter or Ian Rappaport, but hey, if you have speculation news or you have like stuff that could generate buzz or rumors, even informed rumors, that's where I can live and I can thrive. So you have to kind of know your limitations and go 1,000 miles an hour and do the best work that you can within those limitations while trying to push through those limitations. But yeah, I mean, there have been moments where I've questioned a lot of things about myself when maybe I was wrong too. And I don't think that it cost me the opportunity at those other outlets because I finished in the top 3 or 4 for both of those positions. But during the interview process, I certainly went through some of that imposter syndrome. There's no doubt about that. It's a real thing.
Oh yeah, for sure. I mean, we live in a world where at the click of a button you can compare yourself to 100 people. As a person who's creating content around beautiful people, you're
Big fan
constantly
of your work, by the way.
measuring yourself against.
Big fan of your work. The stuff you throw
Oh,
on
thanks,
social,
man.
I love checking it out. I'm a big fan. You do a nice job.
Thank you. I appreciate that. But it's like very easy to get lost in the sauce of social media where it's I'm not getting enough likes or I'm not getting enough views and it's like can be to the detriment of the thing that I'm put here
Why
to
do my
do, which is
tweets
to
get
take
such
photos.
lower engagement than this person who has fewer followers? We've all been there, right? We all get sucked into it a little bit.
Yeah, it sucks. It's like the cliche catch 22 of social media where it can be this tremendously powerful tool to forward yourself, and at the same time it could be the thing that just like detriments you to be wrapped up in why is it not me. It's the double-edged sword of social media. But for you, when you look at the fact that you've got a company that's investing a lot of time behind you, do you look at like the personalization of it as Matt Lombardo and the number attached to your name as tertiary because you have that security with the partnership that you have with Heavy? Is it like a thing that you concentrate at all about anymore? It's more about just doing the
I
work.
used to be obsessed with Twitter followers. Like I used to be obsessed with how my work was perceived on social and the engagement. And there are times where I'll count the retweets or I'll look at how many impressions that a tweet has gotten. You have to, right? Because that's the only way that you figure out what your audience is after and what your audience wants to read or see or hear about. But it's gotten to the point now with all the resources that Heavy is throwing behind me, as supportive as they have been since my arrival there, that I'm not driven by the retweets and the likes. They're nice, and it's always easy to see when a podcast or a video clip or an article goes viral. But I think that I find more, what's the word I'm looking for here? Validation in the amount of people who are reading the work or the amount, because there's a very public scoreboard on some of these articles, every article at Heavy, it shows like how many reads, how many shares. So the stuff that I'm really proud of, I take great pride in knowing that I did the best work that I could. And obviously, if it's received well within the industry, that helps. But there are certain times when you're looking at that scoreboard and you're like, man, that really took off, and I'm happy about that. Or you'll write something great and it'll get 200 views, and you're like, well, why is that? But that's where I think that
Yeah.
social media might cheapen what we do a little bit, because you could take it, you personally, you could take it an artistically incredible, amazing photo that you put on Twitter, and you're proud of that photo, and it gets 100 impressions. But the thing that you
Yeah.
snap with your iPhone at sunset because it's a cool sunset and that gets 20,000 impressions, you almost have to train yourself to realize it's the algorithm that's driving those things, not the quality of work. But that it's a battle we all struggle with as creators, right?
Yeah, you know the someone I read recently or saw probably on a TikTok. Why am I lying and saying I read it? I saw it on a TikTok. It's true though. The thing that's fucked up about social media that we can't really understand or grasp anymore is like if I get 100 likes on something, that doesn't seem like a lot. But if I put 100 people in my apartment, no one could fucking move,
Right.
right? So
God, what a
our
great fucking
means in
image.
which we measure,
Holy shit. Yeah.
yeah, well, not in my studio. But like, maybe think about it just like logically, like very long ago, I used to write for this outlet, Elite Daily,
I
and I wrote
remember.
an article that went super viral, and it was like it's embarrassing now looking back on it. It's such trash, but I it got 1 million likes on Facebook, and I was like, holy shit, that is like an insane number, and I think to the detriment of my own ability to measure success though, because everything I do now is warped to, well, it's not 1 million, so who cares, right? And I think there is that sort of context that we need to be able to frame success on these platforms, because if you have 1,000 likes on something, you put 1,000 people in a room, you can build a hugely successful brand with 1,000 people. But we're just so blinded by that number of we need millions that it's difficult to sort of frame success in a way other than
Yeah, it's tough to
millions.
really measure success based on social media. And as much as you and I create, as many articles and podcasts and video posts that I'm putting out on a daily basis, a weekly basis, a monthly basis, same with you. You almost have to treat it as every photo is a step in a marathon, right? Like every
Mm.
podcast is a step in a marathon. Not everything needs to win a Grammy Award or win a Pulitzer. It's nice to win some Pulitzers along the way, or at least in your own mind, realize that you did great fucking work in that case. You know what I mean? But I think that needs to be the validation rather than, hey, this got like one person with 50,000 Twitter followers retweeted this, and now it has 150,000 likes. I think we have to get ourselves out of that mindset and refocus on the quality of the work that you're putting out and realizing the difference between what's quality and what's just you checking a box. And you don't want to check a box every time, right? You want to put out the best quality you can, but you have to have the understanding that, hey, not everything is going to be your best work. As long as you try to do your best in that moment, to me, that's all you can do.
I really like that. I think that's crucially important, especially with, you work a long year, right? Like
It doesn't end,
it's,
right?
I don't know. Yeah, yeah.
June, June,
It really
June
in the
might
news
June
cycle.
might be the off month, right? Like you cram all your vacations into June because July you got training camp and then the preseason and you're off to the races. But even with you, you take a great photo, just because John Cena doesn't retweet it, you know what I'm saying? Or
Even though he doesn't
it
follow
follows me
me.
too. I think he's been on a following spree lately of journalists and creators. But
Yeah,
you know what I'm saying though? If one person retweets it, now it's in the cycle and it's going to get you know what I mean? You
yeah,
almost can't judge yourself on the likes because sometimes it all takes is one person to put it into their ecosphere for it to get those likes, but that's not always a measure of the quality of the work.
totally. I talk about this a lot on the podcast because I interview a lot of creative people, whether they're photojournalists, whether they're photographers, musicians, whatever. It is something that I try to wrap my brain around, not forcing something to live in a certain way. I'm thankful that, I'm 37 years old. I have reached a comfort in my creativity and my creative process that I didn't have 2 years ago. So just in the ease in which I'm able to create now, I take solace in the fact that I'm creating the best work of my life. I know that a week from now, a month from now, a year from now, it's going to fall into the hands of the people that I
Right.
want it to. But that's the 37-year-old's brain. The 25-year-old, I could never have imagined that.
At 25,
But
you're
yeah, it could be.
chasing the legacy, right? At 25, I'm desperate to hold that ESPN microphone flag, Matt Lombardo, ESPN. You know what I mean? But at this point, when you've carved out a niche, you've carved out a role where you do pretty well for yourself at an outlet that cares about you and values you and is invested in your success. I don't need to go to an ESPN or a Fox Sports or a CBS Sports to feel validated. I feel like I'm at if this is the destination for me, I want to be paid and I want to be valued, and not necessarily in that order. I mean, you look at what's happening at these bigger outlets and these bigger legacy media companies. I have a family to support now. I don't know that I want to swim in those uncertain waters. If I know that a place is going to invest in me, allow me to do my best work, to me that's a pretty great spot to be. It's a pretty sweet spot.
Oh, absolutely. I completely agree. I think and that's again, it comes with age, right? You have to be able to put yourself in a position to provide when, 10 years ago, you were probably
Right.
chasing the flag, right? You
Yeah.
wanted to have that. I get that completely. It is a long season. It's just ended a week ago. How do you deal with the length, the breadth of an NFL season? It can be a lot. You're working crazy hours, weird hours. Stories break all times of day. Unfortunately, sometimes at night, DUIs, terrible shit. How do you deal with like just the cacophony of experiences that go on over the course of the year without burning out and
Oh, there's a
flaming?
lot of burnout. I mean, there are a lot of seriously, there are a lot of stretches where it's a Thursday in week 12 and you just don't have it. You know what I mean? Like you need to recognize that you're burnt out. You need to realize when you couldn't push through being burnt out. And this is the Wrong Advice podcast, but some of the best advice that I've gotten is from Doug Farrar, who's a good friend over at USA Today, runs Touchdown Wire. And he told me in Indy the one time, hey, burnout's a real thing, but you need to know when you personally are capable of pushing through it and writing through it and working through it, and when you just need to put your hands up and go outside and smoke a cigar. Or my buddy's a poker pro and he has a golf simulator in his garage that he built. I got to know when I need to take 3 hours and go play Augusta on the golf simulator or hit a bucket of balls, or go play with my
Yeah.
kids, or go take my wife out to dinner or cook or whatever it is, just to turn off for a couple of hours. And, my week to week is pretty interesting. The NFL has off on Tuesdays, but Tuesday I'm writing my big 2,500 omnibus around the league column that goes live on Wednesday mornings. Genius in me decided that was also the best day to record my podcast every week on Tuesdays. So Tuesdays become the busy day, the hell day, if you will. So by nature, Wednesday, barring some sort of breaking news, that might be my day to be like, okay, hands off. I'm taking my kid to the playground today. Like I need that, or else by week 6 of on a Wednesday, I'm going to be fried. You know what I mean? So you just have to build in little breaks for yourself. I go to 4 or 5 Penn State games a year, and that's a Saturday where I let loose. And Sunday, you're watching all the games on TV or in the stadium somewhere. You just have to realize what your own limitations are and what your own abilities are in those burnout situations, and whether you can fight through them or you need to take a step back and do something else for a couple hours. And usually, being in Happy Valley or the playground or cooking a nice meal or smoking a cigar or playing virtual golf, usually that'll get me back where I need to be by the next day.
That's cool. I like that. I think being able to know when you need to pull back, it's crucial to success. I think if you can have that sort of mental capacity to be like, "Whoa, this is going to be a problem. I need to take a minute," and you can pre pre realize that
You
that
kind
that
of
could be
have to,
great.
right? Like I'm sure if you
I'm
get
very
slammed, right? If you have a busy schedule, or 2 days worth of editing, there's got to be moments where if you're going through the editing process and it's too much, that if you try to go out and shoot that next day, you're not going to be at your best, right? So I think you almost need to. Society tells us we need to work 80 hours a week every single week and push, 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 push. But eventually that rubber band snaps, and I just try to, the best I
mhm.
can, try to manage that rubber band not snapping, or at least not snapping in the middle of a season, because then you're fucked.
Yeah, I think that's a great metaphor. I'm gonna steal that rubber band snapping. I like that. You've obviously had the privilege of covering a lot of great stories over the 10 plus years that you've been in the industry. Do you have any dream podcast guests, dream profiles to write? Any sort of pie in the sky this would make my career, this would be a dream scenario for
Man,
yourself?
that's really interesting because I don't really get starstruck. You know what I mean? Like I don't really have, at least on the NFL side of things. I mean, if going outside of sports, if I could get Bruce Springsteen or Barack Obama on a podcast, I think that would be, I mean, that would check a lot of boxes for me, and
Yeah.
it would be a bucket list type of situation. Man, that
Bruce
a
might be
little easier,
easier. He's more
little more
accessible, I feel like.
accessible. Yeah, Nils Lofgren and I, one of the guitarists in the E Street Band. I mean, we DM back and forth from time to time, so there's the connection, right? Like Nils, put a bug in Bruce's ear. Come on
There
the
you go.
pod. No,
You got to start with
yes,
Niels, so then you hope that Bruce sees
right.
it.
Yeah,
It's like,
that would
yeah,
do it.
yeah,
But as far as the NFL goes, I
yeah.
mean, would it be great to interview Tom Brady or Gronk? Of course, it would be great to interview Tom Brady or Gronk. But the chances of you getting those guys is the only way it's going to be is in a car wash situation where they're doing 30 different media availabilities the same day that they're on with you. So what are you really getting out of it? But um,
No,
I guess my bucket list is just to keep churning out quality content, keep being a figure of the moment that people turn to and find relevant, both in terms of my opinions, my takes, and the information that I'm willing and able is probably the better word. The information that I'm able to bring to the public. That's my goal. Stay relevant and stay top of mind for people.
I like that. As a primary writer to now a multifaceted media personality person, do you have any ideas about maybe writing a book? Is there anything in development? Is anything along those lines that you have put the
That's
seeds
always been
into?
a bucket list item of mine is to write a book. There are a couple ideas that I've percolated on, over the years, and uh, maybe 60-year-old Matt in 20, 30 years. I'm 36, so maybe in, gosh, what are we talking, 24 years? Maybe I'll get to sit down and write that book when everything else kind of slows down a little bit. How about you? Do you have any
Well,
book
by that
projects in development, John?
I'm writing a screenplay right now, and it's proving to be hard. Well, it's so much harder than I thought. Um, I've always been like
Yeah.
a writer. I use the term writer in with air quotes because what I used to put out was garbage, trash, dog shit. But I have a really good story in mind, and I put an outline together. And now the process of turning the outline into the screenplay is proving to be incredibly difficult. It's just finding the time to want to do it. Number one, I've just been
Yeah.
busy with life, right? Podcasting, photography. It's just like there's a lot of hours in the day, and a lot of them are allocated already. So the hours that I could put towards it, I would rather sit on my couch, watch a movie, and drink a
See,
bourbon
that's where I
than
am.
write. And
That's where I
I
am.
think,
You're
yeah,
writing, you're on camera, you're picking up the phone and talking to sources all the time. Where do you schedule in the time to write and write well? I mean, that to me, that's the conundrum. And I had a conversation with a colleague of mine in Phoenix who wrote a book not so long ago, and it kind of changed the conversation for me because I envision having to sit down with the blank screen and type out 150,000 words at once, but apparently, some publicists and some publishers, they just have you write it chapter by chapter by chapter. That might eventually make it a little bit easier for me to have that undertaking. But writing a screenplay, that's fascinating. I would be all in on reading that screenplay and hopefully seeing the movie.
thanks. I appreciate that. Yeah. I say a lot, my life is a complete and open book. I like tell it like it is. I don't believe that there needs to be any like bullshit about who I am or what I am. And like I live my life openly because I hope that something that I've experienced or gone through can
Man, good
positively
for
impact
you.
another person, or maybe they can learn a lesson. It's like a do as I
Yeah.
say, not as I do thing. I've fucking made so many mistakes in my life, hence the Wrong Advice podcast. But to that degree, like I hope someone hears something that I say and be like, man, that's fucking dumb. I don't want to do that. But I have a good story, and I think it would. It's not like a personal story. I mean, it is, but it's like it's. I don't know. It make for a good rom
Nice.
com. It'll be good. It'll be worth the 90
Just
minutes of screen
put me
time
on the
if I
list
write
for
it
the
sometime.
red carpet premiere. Make sure I'm there.
Done.
I'll tweet
Done.
about it.
It'll be in New Jersey, so it's yeah, I appreciate that. Thanks. Yeah, no, it's good. I think in when you reach a certain age, I'm not married. I don't have kids. I like allocating my time towards creative endeavors, whether it's this podcast, whether it's my career, and writing is just an extension of that. For yourself, do you have any other creative pursuits outside of your day-to-day job, or when you're not doing content creation or writing or producing or whatever it is you're doing, do you like to just like
You know
sit
what?
in
I like to
silence?
sit and sip a glass of scotch. That's what I like to do. Or go play with the kids, take my daughter to the
Okay.
playground, or, my son does the cutest thing now. Like they take turns taking baths, right? So my daughter will be in the bath and my
Mhm.
son will be in the hallway. He's 7 months old, and I'll be doing push-ups. I'll be doing like 25 sets of 25, sets of 15, whatever. And he'll sit there and he'll try to like push himself up. So moments like that are like an escape for me because you have that creative mind going all the time and you're creating all the time that it's hard for me to take time to create something else outside of work and my career. But I certainly applaud people like you who can record a podcast, have this extensive photography portfolio, and then decide, hey, just for the hell of it, I'm going to write a screenplay. I mean, that's amazing. It's incredible. I just wish that I had that energy.
I don't have. I sleep a lot more than you do, Matt, and I don't. I'm not providing for. I have no dependence. I tell people all the time, they're like, "Oh, you do so much shit. It's so cool." I'm like, "Yeah, I have zero dependence. Like, yeah, if you had no dependence, you could do a lot more too."
That's funny. I like that.
When when the season wraps and you sort of take an inventory stock on like what you produced this year from an article perspective, from a podcast perspective, are there any stories that you created over the last, call it a year, that jump out in your mind as something you're super like
I'm just going to
proud
go
of?
to what dropped on yesterday, coming off of the Super Bowl, with Patrick Mahomes winning his second Super Bowl MVP, his second Super Bowl in three trips. I picked up the phone and I started calling around. I talked to six of the Hall of Fame selectors who were in the room, deciding who gets in the Hall of Fame and who doesn't. And I asked a simple question. If Patrick Mahomes falls in love with Disneyland and decides that he's just going to move into Walt Disney's old apartment above the Disneyland Fire Company and never plays another down, does he get in? And I thought that that was he does,
Yes.
and the consensus was that of the six people I talked to, four of them said it would be on the first ballot. All six said he would ultimately get in. But
Yeah.
but that's something I was really proud of because I hadn't seen anybody yet tackle it from that sort of firsthand sourced perspective. So I really enjoyed writing that column. A couple years ago, I wrote a great feature on Jamar Chase and why people inside the league believe that he has all pro Hall of Fame potential. That was at a different outlet before I got to heavy. But I really enjoy writing the column every Wednesday because it gives you the couple of days to kind of digest the biggest developments from Sunday's games, look ahead to what's happening the next Sunday. And it gives me a chance to kind of introduce myself and talk to people around the entire NFL and build relationships based on whatever I'm writing. But I think if you ask me what I was most proud of, it's probably the story that I just wrote coming out of the Super Bowl in Phoenix.
That's great. Great way to end the season. That's pretty cool. I am a big, dumb, irrational Giants fan. I have the most supreme confidence
You
in Joe
should.
Shane
It's a great
and Brian
duo.
Dable. I think what they're, yeah, I agree. I also irrationally have already decided to place a bet on the Giants
You
to win the
told me,
Super Bowl
would you get
next
plus
year. I feel
4,000?
like they are,
You got great odds, right?
yeah, great odds. Yeah, I mean, I didn't win money on the Super Bowl, so like from between what I bet and then what I won back, I think I lost like $200 or something. So I took my winnings and I just dumped it on the Giants to win the Super Bowl because done, big dumb irrational Giants fan. Um, but that being said, talk to me, give me some early spoilers for next year. Who do you think are going to be some surprise teams that may be jumping to the next level, or what are your early 2023
Yeah, I think the
season
Chicago Bears are
predictions?
going to be fascinating because I'm a believer in Justin Fields. I think he has the ability to be a franchise quarterback, and he showed you glimpses of that down the stretch. They have the most cap space of anybody in the NFL. Talking to people down in Mobile, there's a sense that they could trade back from one to two and then two to four, trade back twice, get three first round picks next year, some additional picks this year to really build out that nucleus around Fields and get a great defensive player at number four to kind of anchor that defense. So the Bears, to me, are one of those teams that could sneak into the postseason. A lot of times we see those like worst to first, like the Giants this year. I think the Bears could be that worst to first team. I think the Giants are a team that could win one or
I
two
like that.
rounds next year. I think it all depends on whether Daniel Jones takes another step. But, you know, barring some major changes this offseason, John, I think it's going to be a really familiar Final Four or Final Six next year because I think for the Eagles, their floor is the NFC Championship game because they have a top 10 quarterback, maybe a top five quarterback
Yeah.
in Jalen Hurts. Their roster is still going to be pretty deep.
Yeah.
I think in the AFC, it's going to be the Chiefs, the Bengals, and the Jaguars. I think the Bills might come back to earth a little bit, but they're going to be in the mix as well. I just think you look around the NFL, I think that the cream is starting to separate itself from the rest of the league. But listen, we could be doing this podcast in February of next year after the Bills beat the Commanders or something completely friggin' ridiculous like that, you know? That's the beauty of this.
Well,
Nobody really
it
knows,
depends
you
if
know?
Bezos buys them or not,
Yeah,
right? It's a big dependent
right.
on if Snyder sells the team or not, um, whether they'll be relevant
If
beyond
they ever will
scandals.
be.
But yeah, no, I think that's what's nice. Yeah, right. I think that's what's nice about the NFL. For as much as you said, there is that like sort of distinguishing line between the cream of the crop and the second tier teams.
Yeah.
Anything can happen. I mean, for all of the joking aside, I know everyone was talking about how the Chiefs were, the underdog, but were a fucking really good team, and they've been in the Super Bowl. What is it, 3 of the last 4 years? Hard to say that they were an underdog in any frame of mind, but it's a quarterback driven league. If you've got a guy like Hurts behind quarterback, behind the center, or Mahomes,
Burrow,
or
Allen, Trevor. Yeah.
it's easy to be. There's a million of them, right? So if you have the guy behind center, and I think that's my only concern. Daniel Jones was lights out this year. I have zero questions about if he can maintain this and be better. But there's a reason why his fifth year option wasn't picked up, and it's just my hope that like he's young, he's got plenty of room to grow. So you look at what he did this year. If he's able to have another year in the system with Kafka, that they can build on the successes that they had this
Yeah,
year.
and I think
That's my
that
hope.
they have the cap space, they have the resources to go out and get some players. Two really difficult decisions when it comes to Daniel Jones and to Saquon Barkley. And to me, John, it just comes down to if they're moving forward with Jones, they have to go get him NFL caliber receivers. I mean, you look at the Eagles going out and getting, right,
At
no
least
doubt, the
one.
Eagles went out and got A.J. Brown. To a bit of a lesser extent, you look at the Jaguars bringing in Christian Kirk, and everybody laughed at the contract, but you look up at the end of the year and the stretch run that Christian Kirk had, he was instrumental in Trevor Lawrence taking a big leap. The Bengals pairing Joe Burrow with Jamar Chase, the Bills going out and getting Stephon Diggs. If you're going to build around a young quarterback, you need to get him a legitimate weapon. And right now, the Giants, everybody wants to talk about Ricky James, and it's a nice story. They don't have an NFL wide receiver corps. They need to go get him at least one NFL wide receiver. And then I think the Giants could be cooking with gas because that defense, especially with Wink Martindale staying in place, there's a lot of talent there. The offensive line is getting better. You have two bookends at tackle. They just need to put some weapons around Jones, and I think that they have the ability to surprise some people next year.
Well, listen, Matt, from your lips to God's ears, I've already put
I
my
hope you
money where my
cash.
mouth is, so I hope you're correct. And I do hope that next February we do this again. I like the idea of having a yearly recurrence of having you on. It's been my pleasure having you on the podcast today, Matt. Obviously, I'm a big fan of your work and all that you do. I have an extremely cheesy line. If you've been on my podcast, you're part of my family. And yeah, just thanks again for coming on, Matt. It's been
Love you,
my
brother. Thanks
my
for
absolute
having me.
pleasure.
Really enjoyed it, and yeah, I'm all in on making it an annual survey of the NFL, an annual post mortem, if you will. It's been fun.
I love it. Thanks, buddy.
Awesome.